L'chaim, l'chaim, shalom aleichem. My name is Rabbi Levi Avtzon from Johannesburg. My brother, Rabbi Shmuly Avtzon from Crown Heights. Mashpia in 770, director of SAE, v'chulu, v'chulu, v'dal. Now, we're here to Farbreng on the Sicha of Vayigash, the third curriculum, the third set, and to really open it up. So, Shmuly, if you don't mind, I'll start with the question, and the question is, summarize the Sicha in as short as possible, and like really the point that sits at the heart of both of these Sichas, which was actually the reason why we chose to use the Vayigash Sicha as a lead in and an introduction to Shemos. What's the Nakuda?
Right, so to bring the basic Nakuda, you could say that sort of the one line that comes out of these two Sichas is the big message, which really you can find in so many of these Sichas, especially Tafshin Al, Tafshin Beis, and these two Sichas, you really see it in very direct terms, is the Rebbe addresses the unique time in history we're standing in. Right, in general, the Rebbe called our generation, our doyer, many times the last generation of Galus and the first generation of Geulah. In the later years, the Rebbe was even more direct, and it would speak about the last moments, or the last moment of Galus and the first moment of Geulah, which pretty much puts us in this twilight zone. We're on the bridge, right there in between Galus and Geulah. Being in such a space puts us all personally and collectively in a very interesting place, where on the one hand, we're living a Galus experience, as we'll hopefully talk about over the next little bit, and we could be almost entrenched in this Galus. We're here for over almost 2,000 years. That's a lot of time to enter a Galus reality. On the other hand, we're starting the Geulah process, right, in some way. So we have within us Galus realities, Galus lives, Geulah lives, avodas ha-Galus, avodas ha-Geulah, and the ability to bring is what lies at the core of these two Sichas. The terminology changes a bit, and I'll just use some code words, right? In Vayigash, the Rebbe uses words like bringing together Mordechai and Haman, and in Shemos, the Rebbe uses words of bringing together Galus and Geulah, Yetzias Mitzrayim and Geulah Shlema, Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lazar ben Azarias, the two paths, the two shittas. But ultimately, it boils down to the same point, bringing these two together in almost a seamless way.
Okay, so let's start with a few assumptions that you could choose to agree with or not. It's 30 years after the Sichas were said. Would you agree with me that currently we're living in some of the toughest times in these 30 years? In other words, that we're going and we're doing this, we're learning the course, we're doing these Sichas at a time that seems to be this biggest cognitive dissonance between what the Sicha is saying and what we're living? Or is that a hyperbole?
Well, can you say one statement so I can actually argue it? Am I supposed to argue with that, or are you giving me the ability to argue?
In other words,
right.
Basically, my lead up is that I want to, if we can almost put the two extremes the Rebbe is trying to get us to live seem to be as polar distant as possible, especially now. Now, yeah, I guess it's a bit.
So that's the point, right? So that's the point that I was sort of trying to address. That the moment we speak about this fusion, so somehow paradoxically, we can never be far from it. Because what will you say? That the fusion is only of 2 points that are close to each other, but now the two became more extreme, they're more polarized. In other words, is it not Galus? Is Galus not Galus anymore and Geulah is not Geulah anymore? Or you're saying Galus is more Galus and Geulah is more Geulah, right? The moment you say that these two sides go together, so we're addressing the reality that it's two sides, right? No one ever thought Mordechai and Haman are not opposites, right? Lasis kirtzoy ish v'ish, which was what Achashverosh was trying to do, And as the Rebbe brings a different Mamori Chazal, that to do Latsois Kirtzoin Ish Ve'ish, it's impossible. It's not for human beings. It's something that's in godly territory. The Eibishter himself can do such things, right? But in general, to try to play both sides, right? In general, we look at people that try to play to both sides, try to make everyone happy, and just move the goalpost based on who they're talking to. We don't necessarily look at that as someone respectable, right? We don't see that as something proper. You're a player. You're going to all sides. If it's not the Eibishter himself doing it, then you're just playing around. But what the Rebbe introduces in the Sicha is the ability to sort of play the Las Isker Tzayin Ish Ve'ish, but not from a place of weakness, from a place of strength, from a place of fusion.
Okay. So let's focus on the Haman for a while, for the Galus, the Rabbi Gamliel, whatever perspective we're going on.
Sorry, right, whichever way you'll take it.
Okay, so is Galus real? In other words, what we're living in. Like when you learn the Sicha, you might interpret it that, like, are you kidding me? I mean, the Rebbe is describing that I could live the Mesa Mashiach lifestyle, that I'm transcendent, that I'm bigger than this. And we're like, we're all living within our own reality. And we know the temptations. We know, we're living in a week of scandals and stuff. Like, what is this? Is it like, is the Rebbe talking real? Or is this almost exited out of our reality?
Okay, so it's not going to be a question and answer, right?
Right. It's just unpacking.
I'm trying to unpack it. I should say something so that way you could bring the other side. Right. So first of all, I think it's a very important point when we speak about Galus and Geulah. And is Galus real? Meaning maybe it's all in our minds, right? Isn't the Rebbe saying that it's all Geulah and sort of just open your eyes, right? So is Galus real? I think the important point to realize is that from the outset, from the beginning, Galus and Geulah are perspectives. Right? There's the vart from, I think it's brought from Rebbe Hillel Paracher, quoting the Alter Rebbe, that Lifnei Rashpi v'Chaveirav lo nechrav habayis. Tzaddikim on the level of Reb Shimon ben Yochai and others, and the Rebbeim have brought the same applies when they get to big Tzaddikim, when they get to the Rebbeim, when they get to very spiritually in tune individuals. Lo nechrav habayis. Beis Hamikdash was never destroyed. Meaning there are people that are always living Geulah. So it's not just that, like, okay, there were times that Galus was real, Geulah was real, but now it's all about your perspective. It's always been about your perspective. That's what Galus and Geulah is. They say, is Galus real? Is Geulah real? If you're experiencing Galus, then you're in Galus. If you're experiencing Geulah, then you're in Geulah. Now, what the Chiddush today is that it's not just up to Rashbi, the Chaveirav, and a few other unique individuals to live Geulah. Now the Rebbe says every single one of you can open your eyes and enter this reality, right? So that's the kunz. So is Galus real? Of course it's real. If you're living in Galus, it's real. Is Geulah real? It is. If you're living Geulah, it's real. But here, the depth over here is that they can both be real at the same time. Meaning it's not just you're in Galus, jump out of Galus and start living Geulah reality. There's a truth to that as well, and that's a very high avodah. Yet there's something perhaps even greater, which is merging the two. So on the one hand, it's greater. On the other hand, it's also, you could call it somewhat of an nechama, because for many of us, it's like, okay, so I could just enter this Geulah reality, whatever it even is. And some of us will even say, okay, I know a few people that live in Geulah reality. I'm from a different club. That's not, I don't want to subscribe. I don't subscribe to everyone for their own purposes and insecurities and proper tightness, everyone on their level. And there's a very, you might even call a cool message here that, yes, you can be living in both realities at the same time. They're both true. And ultimately, that Geulah can help you within your Galus reality.
Okay. So, sorry, just continuing with another question. So we're sitting here, I have a phone in my hand. We're sitting in front of a computer. We're doing this digitally. And it's no secret that a large amount of people, if not a majority of youngsters and adults, are addicted to this phone. So, and the phone, whatever, even if we're talking about absolutely klippas noigas stuff on the phone, nothing heck. So you're telling me when that now I'm sitting and wasting my time going through my this, checking the news, etc. And then I step out, and now what? I just make a mind switch and I'm living Geulah. I'm living Geulah while I'm reading the news.
Go on.
For me, like something that like is so important is it has to be when I'm learning the Sicha, preparing the Sicha. If it's not talking to my life and it's only talking to holy people, and I don't know many holy people, and the few I know, as you said, I'm not sure I want to hang around them or their friends. It has to interpret to my life. In other words, it has to be real. Okay, whatever. I'm a yid, I'm a chassid, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm one of the guys. So if it's only talking to the top 2% of holy people, then
right. Someone told me he's package in the mail of Transcend. He wanted to know if the package came along with a dose of psychedelics or at least some form of some substance that will actually allow him to transcend.
Okay.
Sees Transcend, he opens up and he finds a booklet with the Sicha.
So for me, the answer is yes. Somehow, living Geulah is living the life I'm living. It can't be exited. When I am addicted to the phone, then I'm not necessarily living a Geulah lifestyle, but I do believe that if I work on myself to adapt, as you said, the Geulah perspective, because it's only a perspective, then it should be able to offer me tools to live a more balanced, wholesome Geulah lifestyle.
Right. Okay, let's do, if possible, let's do a bit of a history class over here, based off the points that Rebbe brings in the Sicha of Shemos. I think it brings a lot of context, right? Especially as we're mamish a few days before Yud Shvat. We're coming from Chavdal Tevis. The Rebbe would very often connect the 2 days. Chavdal Tevis, almost as if Chavdal Tevis, the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, is sort of as a lead up and a chana for Yud Shvat. This connection between Shvi and the Rishon, right? It all lead up to where we are today. So the Rebbe in the Sicha brings the story of Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi ben Azariah, right? Which is actually, the Rebbe brings just the end of the story. The story itself is a fascinating story in the Gemara of the transition of leadership in that time. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, and obviously some changes happened. The community wasn't ready to accept his form of leadership, which is itself a fascinating story and has a lot of connected to today's reality a lot. Either way, he was taken down, and Rabbi ben Azariah was chosen. He was a youngster, he was 18 years old, he was chosen and he was put in that position. The first Mishnah that he says, or that day, one of the Mishnahs that he said that day is Laman Tizker we should always mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Kol Yemei Chayecha. Why does it say Kol Yemei Chayecha? It adds a few points. So then there are two opinions there, right? There's Ben Zoyim and there's the Chachamim, that we don't only mention Yetzias Mitzrayim by day, we also mention it by night, and we don't only mention it by day, or by day and by night, we also mention it when Mashiach comes. And the Rebbe sees this statement as the mission statement of Rabbi ben Azariah. If this is what he said on the day he became Nasi, there's cosmic importance and effect to this. This is like his mimer. This is sort of Rabbi ben Azariah's Basi Lagani, if you will, right? This is his mission statement. Where do we see the biggest change in the actual Nesius, in the actual Anhag of Rabbi ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel? So Rabbi Gamliel, and this associates with the kind of leadership he had, it was more stringent, it was more, sort of more mila lamata, like, my way or the hard way, or the highway. And Rabbi Gamliel says, the Beis HaMedrash is the exclusive club. Right? There are very few people that are shaykhted. People that are ready to live up to certain standards, they can come in. If you're inside, it's not like you're outside. In other words, if you don't live up to the standards that we preach over here and that we have to act upon, then you're not invited into the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes about, opens the Beis Medrash, everyone's available, right? He was sort of he's like the populist Nasi. He's the Nasi for the entire community. You're shaykh, you're not shaykh. This is open for everybody. I think I'm just preaching a bit too long, so take over from here. Yeah. So what happens next? Yeah.
Okay, so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah transforms the whole perspective of people, and eventually even Rabbi Gamliel agrees with him. Rabbi Gamliel comes to appreciate that this is right, and it's important. Just one more point: that this whole story happens after Korban Habayis, not too long after. So it's already a decimated community. It's the beginning of Galus, which is quite interesting. That the Rebbe is taking the Sicha, which is the end of Galus, and it's really talking about a story that was one of the defining stories at the beginning of Galus. It was like even the lead up. You said the story with Rabbi Gamliel. What got him demoted was when he had a very tough relationship with Rabbi Yeshua, where people perceived that he was embarrassing Rabbi Yeshua. He was
himself.
Yeshua to follow the way he wanted, because we need leadership over here. In other words, there was a time of, will Yiddishkeit be fragmented? Will it not be fragmented? Rabbi Gamliel was trying to hold Yiddishkeit together. He wasn't a tough person. And that really was the thing. He was trying to build a foundation. It's similar to maybe what you say the Alter Rebbe at the beginning of Chabad, at least the beginning. He has Chadorim and various levels, and it was in some way an elitist club. Eventually things change after Peterburg, etc.
Exactly. I saw something very interesting just lately. So there was this a writer associated with Chabad. His name was Chaim Eliezer Bechovsky. He was a chassid of one of the Chabad dynasties, one of the sons of the Tzemach Tzedek, Liadi, and then I think it was Babroisk. There were issues there. There were politics with Chabad, and he didn't get along with the Rebbeim. And the earlier, in the times of the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe, we were somewhat, we distanced ourselves from him. But then things sort of changed, and he was more accepted. And by the Rebbe already quoted him, and he was more accepted.
Did the Rebbe publish his Sefer?
So publishes Sfarim, and a lot of stuff are in different Sifrei Kahas, etc. Right. There's a Kisvei of Chaim Eliezer Bechovsky printed by Kahas. So he has a lot of interesting Messiris about the Alter Rebbe and the early days of Chabad. So one of the things he writes is actually a bit different. We always speak about pre-Peterburg and post-Peterburg and the changes that happened. So he has a list of things that he got the Kabbalah, the Messiah, of changes that happened pre and post-Peterburg. He has a list there of like 5-6 major changes. Some of them very interesting. So one of the things he writes is that till Peterburg, the Alter Rebbe went b'shitas Rabbi Gamliel. Post Peterburg, he moved to Shittas Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In other words, he associates it with the Gemara. Based off things that he heard from previous Chassidim. In other words, until then, the Chassidus, and what's connected with the Chassidus he's teaching, the Chassidus until then was high, very strong one-liners, if you will, these small, very dense mamarim, very high energy, not really shaykh for the masses. Then he sort of, in a way, toned down the energy. It was more in Chabad style. Even people on a lower level perhaps are able to understand it, even if you're not on a very high spiritual level. So, and that was Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. So much so, the way that the Rebbe said, the Rebbe would quote very often, the Rebbe wanted that Chabad shouldn't be a maflega, shouldn't be a party. It should be for Klal Yisrael. Everyone should be part of Anash, right? So there's, if you will, the democratizing, right? You're making Chabad for the masses, Chassidus for the masses, Primis HaTorah for the masses, which sort of very similar to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. So that's, and this has happened in every der. If you will, this also happened pretty much at the time of the Rebbe's, when the Rebbe started in the Siyas, the Rebbe's Basilagani, the Rebbe's Kabbalah in the Siyas, Yod Shvat. Well, the actual story of Elazar ben Azariah and Gamliel, right? They opened the Batei Medrash for everybody. Until post-World War II, and when we came here to the States and Eretz Yisrael, right? When we had to rebuild Yiddishkeit, who were the yeshivas for? How much percent, never mind of Klal Yisrael, how much percent of Haredi, of Frume Yiddishkeit, Frume Jews, how much percent of the Bachrim and of the kids were in the yeshiva system?
Right.
I don't know, some numbers, 20%, 30%. What were the numbers?
Girls till 1920 something.
So right there you have 50%.
School at all.
Right, and boys, if you weren't shy, if you weren't to be, never mind to be a gadol, if you weren't shy to be a Talmid Chacham, you went to work, right? A Wasserträger, Holz, whatever. Everyone did their thing, and all of a sudden, post-war, we said, and the Rebbeim kocht in this obviously, but this was across the board, pretty much all Daily Yisrael. Open the Bati Medrash, right? We're now going in Shita, Sarblazim, and Azariah. This is now for everybody. Everyone's part of this system.
Which is interesting. We complain about the system. You know, one of the big gripes of people is the system.
Right.
But the system at the core wasn't a system. The system was that now we're opening the doors for everybody. The problem was then once we open the doors for everybody, we try to then systemize everyone to become elitist.
So right. So we'll try to approach that and talk what's, it's because when we open the system, right? When we say the extra 80%, if we'll call it that, right, can now enter. What are we saying with that? Are we saying now that all of a sudden everyone became Talmidei Chachamim? Are we saying now the main thing is, right, because now we can't allow people to be out, everyone has to go to yeshivas because it's the only way to stay from. So we'll keep the yeshivas the same way they taught all along, all those years, right? Since the yeshivas opened in Volozhin, we'll continue that system, but now we'll just have 80% of the zal or the classroom is taking up space and spacing out. Are we saying now we have to teach to the lowest common denominator, right? Teach to the lowest level, and now the top 20 or 30 or 50% have to now figure out what to do and go bored out of their minds, right? So it's all part, and this is part of this discussion. In other words, what exactly is Rabbi ben Azariah doing? So in his case, it wasn't necessarily academically opening it for the academically challenged. It was opening it for those that are ethically challenged. In other words, ein teichem kebarim. But it's the same question. What does it actually mean? So this that we're saying that now it's for everybody and everyone can enter the base medrash, that's not the vart of this. This is the basic story of the Gemara. The point that Rebbe points out here, which is in the Gemara, but we don't necessarily chap the oimek, that Rebbe is saying, Rebbe Gamliel joined. So what does it mean that Rebbe Gamliel joined? You read the Gemara, Rebbe Gamliel joined, even though he had one form of leadership, he had one way of looking at things, he was smart enough, or he was humble enough to see that the masses moved to Rebbe Gamliel, to Rebbe ben Azariah. I'm not going to I see my way is not the way that's working now. Fine, so he conformed to the new reality. Rebbe says, no, it doesn't work that way. We're talking about tzaddikim. We're talking about tanoim. Rebbe Gamliel is a shitta. It's a shitta of Torah. Rebbe ben Azariah is a shitta of Torah. By saying that Rebbe Gamliel entered the base medrash, what we're saying is that somehow the base medrash being open for everybody, the shittas of Rebbe ben Azariah, still works with the philosophy of Rebbe Gamliel. Rebbe Gamliel can now implement his philosophy. He felt that the base medrash is a place that he'll feel comfortable. He can implement his philosophy in the base medrash of Rebbe ben Azariah with the extra, what does it bring, 400 benches, 700 benches,
100 benches,
hundreds of people that joined.
How? In other words, so what is that? So let's think of a typical yeshiva, because that's one of the big conversations people have, the system. So typical yeshiva, no names anywhere on the planet. There's the 20%, that's flying high, that's Pashat gets it, that understands that Ashba and that I did very easy. There's the top 20, the bottom 20% that's not interested, the 20, 60%, everyone loves their definitions of how to divide. The point is, so now the other 80% is sitting in the Zal, and Rabbi Gamliel is telling them what?
Okay.
Hey, what's he telling them?
Go for it.
So I'll actually use the Rebbe's words. You would think that because this person is not Teichik Kabbalah, you can't accomplish with him a Geulah Shlema. You can only accomplish a Geulah She'ena Shlema. You can only accomplish a Skafia. Because Geulah Shlema means somebody's 100% inside the government, whatever, Teichik Kabbalah. So Chachamim come and tell us that even somebody that's not Teichik Kabbalah, you can accomplish a Geulah Shlema. In other words, based on that kid's skills, you can elevate the child, the student, to their ultimate potential, and their ultimate potential is their goal. Is that correct?
It definitely is correct, right? But obviously we have to try to figure out how exactly does that work? In other words, what exactly, meaning, so there are, in other words, the lower 20% is not a fact, the lower 80% is not a fact. It's all, made up numbers just to make a teacher feel more comfortable in class when he walks in the first day and sees, right? Are we really saying that the whole class is geniuses? Right? Are we saying that really everyone has a higher level of IQ? Are we saying everyone really is more frum and chassidish and moral and
we're saying that we don't care. We're saying that each and every one is serving the Eibishter and living their subjective Geulah, because I guess one point that we should explore is Geulah is an objective experience or subjective? And based on what we spoke about earlier, it's subjective because it's each in your own perspective. So if somebody has an IQ of 130 and the other person has an IQ of 90, they can't be both expected to live the same Geulah. In other words, if Geulah is an objective experience, then somehow the guy that has an IQ of 90 is supposed to be understanding a shtukel Gemara the way the guy that has a much higher IQ, which is not shaykh. Whatever, you can maybe say the guy could push his effort, but it's still, some people are born with kishtenis and some people will struggle. So Geulah is a subjective experience, is it not?
Yes, perhaps, right, yeah, pretty much. Then the question is, so is the mission to go out to everyone and tell everybody, okay, guys, get into this Geulah mode and just leave Golus behind, right? Leave Golus behind. F in the Eigen, you're in Geulah. Golus won't exist anymore, right? So the girl comes over and says, so you're basically telling me, okay, what are you saying? Learn this Sicha or get involved, come to the Farbreng, be part of the community, come to the Shir, and Golus as you know it ceases to exist. There is no Galus. You won't have challenges. You won't have these struggles. You won't have these nephilis. You won't have these real, the dark side will just disappear. You enter fully the place of Geulah. Right? And now, which is basically the shit of Ram Gamliel.
But that's not really possible. Until Mashiach comes, nobody's getting rid of their skeletons in their closet.
Right. So there's an implication here where there is this, we're allowing all the students to be there in their Golus reality, subjective, objective, but they're in their reality, and yet implement Geulah ideals, implement the Geulah reality. We're talking about the yeshivas and all the kinds of Talmidim. So actually, there was once without getting into the pratim, it was in Tafshin Lamed Beis in 1972, around Purim time. Basically, here in 770, they split the yeshivas. They split the American Bachrim, the Israeli Bachrim, and I was holding there were older Bachrim and younger Bachrim, the Bachrim that should be learning here, Bachrim that should be learning in Chayv Beit Torah, and the yeshiva down the block. And obviously, the guys are very unhappy with this because, first of all, no one wants to be kicked out of their place, especially you're in the Rebbe's Dalal Amis, you have to move somewhere else. And generally, you start, profiling, and these guys belong here, these guys belong there. And the Rebbe spoke about by the Farbreng on Purim. It's on video, and the Rebbe didn't go into the details of being in 770, outside 770. The Rebbe turned into a discussion in general about levels in teaching and in the classroom, right? When you streaming, when you put some kids, you have a greater class, and you have the Mitzianim class, and the more Pashta class, etc., which is a whole topic of its own, and we're not going to assume, right, but just to touch upon it. In other words, what's really the debate? Some people will say, look, you have kids that are smarter, they're shaykh to learn much more. So it's for their gain. You have kids that are on a lower level, let them learn things that make sense to them, that they'll actually understand instead of having to hear higher stuff. So everyone's gaining. What's the counter argument to that? There are many, but what's at the core of the counter argument? The counter argument is you're taking this guy and telling him you're from the lower 10, 20%, right? You're officially labeling this kid and you're keeping it there. And basically he can, so yes, will he get something shaykh at his level? Perhaps, but he's not going to pass that bar, right? He'll stay there on the bottom.
You're limiting
Versus
him.
if he's over here, maybe he won't fully understand, but maybe he or she, maybe they'll sort of be able to get elevated. The Rebbe said no, it's farkeret. The Rebbe said why? These kids, right? We'll call them the lower part of the class. When they're in the regular classroom, so all is cool. Like, yeah, they're part of it. They have no clue what's going on, what's being taught, but they're part of the system. They're in it. They don't really even feel a lack. The Rebbe said now they go into that classroom. There's two values. Number one, they'll actually learn and understand. They'll get what's going on. But that's not the kunst. That if we'll use the terminology of the Sicha, that means you're saying that you could live Yitzias Mitzrayim. You could live a lower level of Geulah on your level. The kunst here is that once they're there and now they see, one second, there's where to strive to, there's where to go to, there's where to move up to. Then Mayim Tachtoinim Boichim, right? Like the lower waters in the second day of creation, we're crying, hey, why are we down here? We want to be closer. All of a sudden, it's Ma'irat Simayim, a thirst to go higher. In other words, by the Rebbe, there was never a decision that was, okay, we have to take you and your struggles into account, and we have to preach to the bottom. We have to talk down, right? The people there on the bottom. Yes, maybe at the moment we'll speak something on your level, but ultimately it's about bringing you up. All the decisions are taking into account that how would I get you back to the top, or to the top initially? How do I get you up there, right? We'll bring everyone into the base medrash, and everyone is shy. And ultimately, let's say now, right? So it's not just about the base medrash. We're going out there. Chabad is all over the place, right? At this stage, we are Judaism. We are the face of Yiddishkeit in America, the face of Yiddishkeit in the world, right? If we're Chatz Shalom still in Galus in a few years, Chabad is just growing. The Rebbe is the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael, not just Beruchnis Inyanim, and it's the previous Inyanim, but Bepoil. And what's the message we're giving to the people? So sometimes we look at it as Chabad in the base medrash, there's Chabad in 770, in the yeshivas, in our communities, but then there's the Chabad that we preach to the world. Peace and love.
Fluff.
Right, well, some level. And then even in ourselves, as when we're in yeshiva, and then when we're in the workforce, when we're out there. And in our personal lives, in the moments of yeshiva, the moment there's davening and out of davening, there's Yom Pagra, there's a Yud Shvat, and then there's Stamimul of Tevis or Cheshvan, another gray month. And how do we bring these together? How do I, in that lower reality, what you call in the Galus reality, be able to elevate myself and incorporate Geulah into that?
Great. So that was a 20-minute question.
I tried. Was it 20 minutes?
Just kidding. So in general, I find a lot of people are very good at asking questions, and the truth is maybe the question Shalos Chacham's Chatzi Tshuva. So
right, but I think in this case, when we're talking about paradoxes, the question is is itself the answer, because part of the answer is figuring out how to acknowledge and live with the tension of the paradox.
So that's where I want to go. I mean, that's where I think we could go. The idea of living paradox. It's actually the introduction to the course. We spoke about that whole idea of living paradox.
Right.
Because, yeah, of course, yours truly. Paradox is uncomfortable, and I don't know, it's been bothering me recently, but I guess it's my gripe that, we live in a time of courses. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry opens a course. And a course on parenting, a course on this, a course on that, a course on Chassidishkeit, a course on teaching. And you need your one big idea because you have to be in the Chadish. So you come up with your big idea, and then Hamida Nalachas, like the Navi, but Habakkuk came and put everything on one Nekuda, and Munah, so these guys put it on one Nekuda. And we try to offer a simplistic answer to the issue. You want to know how to manage your classroom?
Everyone in their ear.
Yeah, So if you want to know how to manage a classroom, A, B, C, follow. I can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yeah. What you say?
I'm saying this one is the advice for Shalom Bayis. This is the advice for business. This is the advice for the
This-
yeshiva
the-
system. If all
The
the yeshivas will listen
ABCs,
to
the 4Ds, and the 3Ss, and the 14 this, and every. And for me, although I appreciate it, and like Chas v'shalom, I don't want people to say I don't believe in growth, but it's often comes across too simplistic. Instead of saying I have a idea, it becomes the idea. Why? Because nobody wants to live paradox. One of the stories, I think his name was Alexander ben Nun. He was a big mechanech in Eretz Yisrael. He came to the Rebbe and the Lamids, and he prepared the 10 Commandments of education. And the Rebbe looked at it and said, they're fine, they're all wonderful, but you forgot the 11th commandment, that there are no commandments in education. They're tips, but don't make, this is the non-negotiable. You want to know how to raise your kid to be a Chassidish kid in 2021? This is it. Okay, this and this and this. Why? Because we hate paradox. So what's
good is that reality always. What's good is that reality always changes. Therefore, you could say the 10 tips for 2021 isn't the 10 tips for 2022. So you could make a new course.
And then basically each guy that figures out the right thing becomes the new fad. Like, even in the film world, we have fads where suddenly the new people become, oh, you heard that guy, you have to go to his or her chinuch course. They're going to change your life. And then, oh my gosh, you have to go to this person's Farbreng. And then 2 years later, they're totally out of the fad because they haven't adapted to the new ABCs. And sorry for the cynicism of it, but for me, I think it lacks.
We'll really try our best to keep you on a longer leash.
So
I'll speak to Shlomi, give you more time.
I think the point that we have to explore is embracing paradox. In other words, this whole Sicha is coming and saying Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This and that. Galus, Geulah. Yeah, but we like, no. Give me a simple answer. What do you want? I was talking, I have a student that we were talking recently, and they're like, if it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. I said, yeah, there's 613 mitzvahs, there's right and wrong, but beyond that, everything's, not everything, but almost everything's gray. Klippas noiga and simple. You're copping out. I'm not copping out. That's not a cop out. That's the truth. You're copping out because you're trying to make life like as if that you walk into the day and everything's clear. In other words, at the heart of the Sicha is that, yes, it's complicated, it's complex. Your challenges are real. Your shalom bias issues are real. Your chinuch kids issue with your kids are real. The daughter's not finding a shidduch. It's real. We're not, and at the same time, you're living a Geulah, you're opening your perspective. You're stressing, but you're being bigger than your stress. You're addicted, but you're becoming bigger than you're addicted. You're traumatized, but you're bigger than your trauma. This whole nikuda that you don't have to be defined. You don't have to be defined by lack of nuance, defined by kacha. This is what I am. This is my personality. I'm a this. I'm a doctor. I have this taiva. I have this issue. I'm an addict. Yeah. Fine, you're an addict. It's important to be honest, but that's your definition. Zemi shata. This is all of you. And today, we're like, he's chassidish. He's not chassidish. She's, with it. It's like simple definitions that always, even before these sichas, disrespected the complexity of humanity. But how much more so now when the Rebbe is telling us that not only can each and every one of us be a Baini, but in many ways we can be a tzaddik. In other words, we can be an incredible level, that we can live an incredible paradox. It's important to sit there embracing it within others, but most importantly within ourselves. Rant, nicht rant, what is it?
Well, part of what you said, definitely. There's, it's when you look at the Sicha, I was thinking, like the message of the Sicha, and to take it out of the words of the exact Sicha, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel, Galus and Geulah. Also, the words Galus and Geulah are used so much that sometimes we forget what their actual meaning is, and when as it pertains to our avodah and ourselves and our lives. sometimes using other words, not necessarily has to be proper English words, but sometimes just other contexts, even within Chassidus, gives it something relatable. We're coming to Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat, we know, if you say the message of Yud Shvat, and this was every single year, is Basi Lagani. The Frierdiker Rebbe's last Maimer, what the Rebbe called the Tzava, or the Frierdiker Rebbe for the next doyer, and the Rebbe says he finds solutions, the answers to all the questions. The Rebbe said this in the first days. All the questions he's asked, he finds answers in Basi Lagani. But it wasn't just then. Throughout the years, right, for about 40 years, they would chazer Basi Lagani, another Maimer. The Rebbe really saw Basi Lagani as the not just the mission statement, but the map, the roadmap for what our mission is, what our avodah is. And there's many fascinating ideas there. But one of the ideas there that sometimes, we slip through, we chazer it every year. We learn Basi Lagani, and then on Yud Shvat, we read the original Basi Lagani. One of the points that is so fascinating there is that Rebbe uses somewhat similar lingo in the Sicha, is the constant back and forth between Iskafia and Ishapcha. You just look through the first 5 prakim, the initial Basi Lagani, Toshin Yud, he changes the lashon very often, almost every sif. First, like the avodah through the avodah of Iskafia and Ishapcha. Then he says through the avodah of Iskafia, through the avodah of Ishapcha, through the avodah of Iskafia that leads to Ishapcha, just Iskafia. So without getting into the small diyukim, which the Rebbe would speak about in many mamorim and break it down, someone just asked me last week, we're learning a Maimer, and he said Iskafia and Ishapcha. We're doing Ishapcha, we're doing Iskafia. Ishapcha is avodah tzaddikim. How are we doing Iskafia? How are we doing Iskafia?
What does Iskafia mean?
Right? We're trying to avoid.
What does Iskafia mean? Just for the sake of the
right. So Iskafia is, we're speaking to a person that has impulses to inyonei ra, which ra is a very, very wide definition. It can mean things bein adam lachavera, bein adam lamakim. Basically, his impulses are to not follow Torah and mitzvahs to the T, not follow Ratzon Hashem to the T. Impulses, right? We have taivas for all different things. We have urges, instincts, etc., etc. Everyone can take it in their way. And the Alter Rebbe discusses this at length in Tanya. Basically says it's fine that you have these urges, it's fine that you have these impulses. Break yourself, right? Don't give in. Don't think about it. Just move on. Do your thing. And your whole life you're going to have to break yourself again and again. It's like, okay, I broke myself. Why does it come back the next day? That's fine. You'll deal with it, right? One day at a time. And then Alter Rebbe says, "Ulay lekach nivra," right? And don't feel down. Don't feel like life is a failure. Ulay lekach nivra. Maybe you're built for this. Person will say, "No. Let me take those thoughts. Let me take those instincts. Let me take those urges. Let me take those feelings and transform them." Right? This is the next parak in Parak Chav Ches. Alter Rebbe says, "Lahalas hamidus." It's tzaddikim. In other words, know who you are. Don't be a shoita. Don't be a fool and think that you can do tzaddikim avoid. Right? It's not just that parak. This is really one of the main points of Tanya is it's a reality check, right? You're not a tzaddik. You might be a rasha, but you could become a beinani, right? You could live the life of a beinani.
But you'll never change your inside.
You never change your inside. This is the way we usually understand. This is the way we understand Tanya. The Rebbe in the Sicha basically says like this: we're in Baleilos. We're in a time of Leilos. Leilos, if you use it in Tanya language, is Russia. Person's in darkness. He's living a dark life. There's much darkness in his life. Where can he strive to? So first, the Rebbe says, "Maskirin Yitzias Mitzrayim Baleilos." The Rebbe quotes Ben Zayn, right? What's Yitzias Mitzrayim? And Chassidus says Yitzias Mitzrayim is associated with the Iskafia, because that's what happened when we left Mitzrayim. We didn't completely transform ourselves. Ki barach ha'am. We just escaped. We told the Yitzhahara, we told the mind games going on inside of us. We told those instincts. We told those challenges from society, from friends, from family, whatever it is. Talk to you later, or won't talk to you later. I'm running off. I'm getting involved in something else.
Avoidance.
Flight. Right. Move on. So you could have Yitzias Mitzrayim baleilis, right? You, in your leilos, you can live a life of Yitzias Mitzrayim. But then the Chachamim come and say, Lahavi limoisa Mashiach. So Lahavim Mashiach Pashtus means that even when Mashiach comes, we'll still mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the Rebbe learns Al Pichsiz, Rebbe brings a quote from his father, Rebbe Levi, Lahavi L'Mois Mashiach, that even Baleilois Lahavi we can bring in Yemais Mashiach. Not only you can experience Yetzias Mitzrayim today, you can experience the Yemais Mashiach. The Yemais Mashiach associated with this Hapcha, right? We'll call it Hapcha, call it Avodas Tzadikim, as the Rebbe, as you said, the Rebbe spoke about today, doing Avodah of Tzadikim. In other words, the thing what the Rebbe is saying here, you're not speaking about someone that's Rabbi Gamliel caliber, Teichi Kibarek. You're not speaking about someone that's actually living Geulah every moment. You're speaking about somebody that's not only, he's a Halavai Beinani, right? He's Baleilos. He's not even by Yetzias Mitzrayim yet. He's in the darkness. He might be living a dark life in many different areas. And yet we're coming and telling him, you can experience Yetzias Mitzrayim. You can even experience Lahavi Yemois HaMashiach. Even Yemois HaMashiach is Hapcha. Whatever you'll call, the point is you can have the transcendent moments. In other words, you can incorporate within yourself the greatest heights, greatest success, the greatest levels. That's the great message. Now, does it mean that right now I'll do that and then that's it? And now the Yetzer Hara doesn't exist anymore, and challenges don't exist anymore, and there won't be other things going on? You might still be Baleilos. It's revolutionary. Or we'll use the lashon of the Vayigash Sicha. There might still be Haman. You are still living in a Haman reality, in a Haman perspective, in different areas. And yet you're able to incorporate within yourself Mordechai. Able to incorporate within yourself Geulah.
So I want to sit on that Vayigash Sicha for a moment. That Mordechai and Haman, because the Rebbe talks about.
Is there a Shlomi on? I know part of Geulah is L'mayla me'azman, but the point is to bring it into a.
No, we have another 15 minutes. We have another 15, 20 minutes. So the Rebbe over there talks about you could be Mordechai and Haman. How can you be at the level of Mordechai? In other words, how can you be at the level where, like Hashem, they could live paradox, the ultimate paradox is by bittul. So what's bittul? Bittul is it's not about you. In other words, the only way to live a paradox is when it's bigger than you. And the Rebbe sits on that extensively in the Vayigash Sicha. And I think it's a very important point because it connects to everything. Today we live in a world that's all about me. And I'm not saying in a narcissistic perspective. It's figuring out what issues we have and figuring out our background and our future and our dreams and our dust and our yants. And of course, like I said earlier, there's no black and white, so there's room for that. But it's a bit obsessive. And maybe you could say that what the Rebbe is telling us is you want to be able to live this paradox, get out of your own head. Stop thinking the whole day about you. Ask, like they often says, quote JFK, ask not what you need it for, but in the words of the Alter Rebbe, who told the Chassid came and said, he said, and you're not saying what you need it for. In other words, you're saying what you need, not what you need it for. And I think that's a very important point. In other words, if I'm locked in myself and in my own narratives, that is part of Galus. If I'm all in me and my situations and my background and what happened to me, and of course there's room for that, there's cheshbon nefesh, but if that's where I'm living all day, and I'm saying this as somebody who does this, in other words, it locks you in. You cannot live Geulah when you're spending the whole day figuring out how your parents messed you up or your teachers messed you up. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. Deal with it.
You're already creating a binary over here. You're already locking some people out.
I think, like, in order to live Geulah, you have to get outside yourself. That's what the Rebbe says. Because basically, at that Sicha, the Rebbe quotes a medrash that Hashem says, I could do Kirtzai Nishvesh. I can embrace the paradox of both Mordechai and Haman. The Rebbe says, but each and every one of us can do the same thing. How? By having bittul, and then we become Hashem. We get Hashem's keiches. And I think it's such an important idea that part of this transcendence is transcend your own nonsense. Transcend your own narratives. We're so big into narratives. Everyone You go to a course about how to be successful in business. What narrative do you have about yourself? The narratives, everyone's narratives. And it's true, there's place for that. But like we said earlier, when something becomes so extreme that becomes your whole reality, then you're locked in. And I believe a big part of the Galus of today is that we're so locked in our own heads, in our own hearts. We're so spending so much time analyzing ourselves and this and that, and realizing how damaged we are, and focusing how broken we are. And it's taken. And I was telling to you earlier before the Farbreng, we spent a year together in Transcend in Yeshiva. And in Transcend, there's a mashpia named Avtzon, and so stark. He's definitely a bit of a holier character. He's in the top 20%. Sitting in, he's a unique breed. And I remember him saying the following, but could be, I'm not getting exact. He said he heard it from the Rebbe, but could be it was just he heard it from a mashpia. There's a famous story about the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe came to the Magid and eventually decided to go home because he made a deal with his wife that he's going to come home eventually. He gets on the wagon and his his chaver and Melamed, the Alter Rebbe's son, the Avtzon the Malach, who's actually our ancestor, comes and says to the wagon driver, and there's two nusachs, there's two ways of saying it, either shmais the ferd as ezol wissen as a ferd, hit the horse till he knows he's a horse, or shmais the ferd then oisferd, or hit the horse till he becomes no longer a horse. Alter Rebbe hears that and says, oh, I have more to learn. He gets off the wagon and spends a while at the Magid and learns with Avtzon Malach. What did the Rabbi explain? That it's the two oifens of, like you said, iskafia and ishapcha. Hit the horse till they know he's a horse, that's iskafia. Hit the horse, stop being a horse is ishapcha. So Fitcha said there's a third nusach. The third nusach is shmais the ferd as a fargessen as a. Hit the horse till he forgets he's a horse. And his nakuda was, and for me, it's like, I don't remember anything else he ever said. And I've sat by hundreds of hours of his Farbreng. Like each mashpia that you have, you're lucky if you remember. This is the only thing I remember from him saying. Shmais the fed, hit the horse and forget that you're a horse. Don't be in denial of your issues. If you have to be in reality of your issues, otherwise you'll never deal with it. Chas v'shalom, if you could hurt people if you're not in knowledge of your issues. But don't sit on it all day. Kach sich nicht in them. Don't live and sit in the sewer. Chassidim always used to say that what tshuva doesn't mean that you go back into the Aveda and sit and saying, which machshava zara did I have? Let me go think about it. That was wrong. Because then you're back in the machshava zara. Not kaching, not sitting in ourselves, transcending ourselves. That's really the name they gave for this lesson is transcend. Transcend your own narishka. We are all full of garbage. The Rebbe created us with a nefesh habahamis. And the nefesh habahamis doesn't only have a taiva for klippas noiga stuff, it has a taiva for shalosh klippas atmeis. Each one of us has our own impulses and our own issues, but we all have darkness. What does it mean, darkness? We all have made mistakes, and we all have temptations to make even worse mistakes. That's not you. That's a part of you. Deal with it. That's your goal. It's fine. Thus is it. That's you. That's your whole definition of yourself. Stop defining yourself in binary terms. For me, it's
right. It's just interesting. It's here in the Sicha and Shemos. So one of the big verter here, also from Avtzon Malach, right? In Order 64, he quotes the Mishnah Avtzon Malach learned with the Alter Rebbe, which is also then when right. This is the first thing that he learned with the Alter Rebbe. How Maseches Bracha starts, Me'emosai koyer neshma ba'arvin. That in a time of darkness, in a time of night, you're able to have koyer neshma, kabal se'el malchus shamayim. Right? In a time of darkness, transcend yourself, get out of yourself and connect to something much greater. Right? Also, a verse from Avtzon Malach to the Alter Rebbe.
So really,
right,
for me, no, say something, say.
Right. So the truth is that it's a very hard one. You're saying transcend yourself. It's tough. You have people that transcend. To be clear, right? There's a transcendence, if you will, with a lack of self-awareness. Right? So you have people that are completely not self-aware. They hear transcendence, great, Valdic, of course. What do you mean? Self. then you're not transcending anything. You're right. You're not being mechaber anything. You're not bringing anything together.
If I just cut you out, I remember one of our teachers in Yeshiva said, in order to be bittul, you have to have a yesh first. If you haven't learned anything, if you haven't accomplished anything in your life and you're saying you're bittul, you're not bittul, you're just a lowlife. Do something, get an ego from it, and then be about the
It's very similarly here with a bit of a different twist. There's the point that someone will say, there's Ra, there's Yitzhar, there's Nefesh Bahamis. It's never happened, when it's Mashiach and it's all great. All right, it's and I think Moirois of Yom Machreinim show that you can't really live in that kind of place. There has to be personal responsibility, and you have to be aware of what's going on, and we all have. In the Lashon Rebbe, it says in the first Maimer, right? In Yonim, it's very interesting. The first Maimer, the Rebbe speaks about two things that we have to know. There's practical heiros, things to do. Go out there, al tikra vayikra, el vayakri, and skaf and isapcha. But there's two awareness pointers in the Maimer. They're wissen sein. One thing the Rebbe says we have to know that the Rebbe speaks about the nefesh bahamis, was jeder eine weiß as hat. So everyone be aware of your nefesh bahamis. In other words, reality check. You have a nefesh bahamis, and you have your struggle, and you have to do iskafia and ishapkim. You have to work on yourself. That's number one. But together with that comes another, and probably the most vital message of the Maimer. As jeder eine der wissen sein, as me gefindt sich in der Shvi. In other words, know that you're part of Deir Shvi, you're part of a massive new era and a special mission. And that's the Chiddush here. Right? In the Sicha, in Siv Zayin, and perhaps this is what says the word of the Sicha, especially we're coming up to Yud Shvat, they're oiftu for a Nasi b'Yisrael. Right? The Rebbe here defines what is a Nasi. We're all preparing for Yud Shvat, the day of Kabbalah Sinasiyas. What does it mean? What is a Nasi? And throughout the years and many Sichs and Amarim, we have many different definitions of what a Nasi is. But here, the Rebbe uses, you could call it Nun Bey's language to define what a Nasi is. What's the Chiddush of a Nasi? So, Farbreng and Fareitzikin Kol Yemei Chayecha, to use, we'll skip to the end of the paragraph, that a Nasi creates a system where via Yid lept, Kol Yemei Chayecha, it's an Neshama Beguf, Boilam Haza Gashmi Vachumri and Zman Golos. As a Yid lives their day-to-day lives, their neshama in a guf, in the physical and coarse world, in the inner galus, zman galus. So our Kenan and Reis came from Zman. You could leave these boundaries, unachmer, right? Because the first level is you could live Yitzias Mitzrayim, but much greater you could live in a matzav of Yemais Mashiach. You could live a Yemais Mashiach reality. It's that nikuda of, on the one hand, being aware of where you are. Right, you're standing on solid ground. You're not floating barakia shvi. You're here, Tzlamata Ba'aretz, and you're aware of what's happening. At the same time, you know you're in Deir Shvi, you know you're part of something. What's the message of Deir Shvi? Right? Al tikra vayikra el vayakri, go out of yourself. Go out of yourself, you're part of a much bigger mission. As the Rebbe said, Dalo yish prati, right? We're now in a place, you're not just another individual. Not to deny the power of the individual, but saying that you're not just doing something small. Everything you do, you're part of a cosmic mission. You're part of a global mission. We're here to completely be koivish the world and bring the Geulah. When you do that, you're able to, on the one hand, be very aware of what's going on, be very grounded. At the same time, recognize that you're part of something so much greater. But that's a chiddush of a Nasi. And for that, it takes a connection to the Nasi. It takes the Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, and it takes Chassidim Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. It's actually not so simple. One of the Mamarim, Basi Lagani, so the Rebbe actually asked that question, like, how is Basi Lagani so much speaking about Iskafia and Ishapcha? Halavai Beinani, we're barely up to Iskafia. How is Ishapcha shaykh? And the Rebbe says, because Ishapcha is Avedus Tzadikim, but through our connection to that Tzadikim, we're able to have Ishapcha within us. In other words, that's the oiftu of a Nasi. The Nasi is the one that gives us all. You saw there was a stark vart in one of the aras in the Sicha. Yeah, of the page 4, in Ara 44, what Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah created at the end of the Ara, that Bekoiche shel Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, Hanasi underlined, it's the Nasi that connects these two realities. Shagam bizman hazeh itzel kol Yisrael. even in this time, it's a Kol Yisrael. What's Kol Yisrael? Because there are those people, there are those tzaddikim that even Galus are always living Geulah. Rabbi Shimon Yochai and others, with the great Chachamim. Ben Zoyma, Rabbi uses Ben Zoyma as a dogma. He was living Geulah even now. But to take people, regular people, and people that are aware of their reality, that they should have a matzah to be a Moshe Mashiach, that's the power of a Nasi. Perhaps that's the Rebbe's greatest message and the biggest mission to do this, to be Mechaber Galus and Geulah. To be a chassid, on the one hand, a chassid, right? What's the Friedrich Rebbe brings, right? A chassid no mailas atzmai and chesreinas atzmai. You don't know mailas atzmai, you're going to underestimate. You don't know chesreinas atzmai, you'll overestimate. Right? You have to be aware of what's going on. At the same time, you're way beyond that. Why? Because all these things are part of you, but they're not you. You are a chassid. You are a yid. You are a neshama. You're something so much greater. Well, mainly, it gives you the ability to accept everything that's going on.
You could stand outside of it while being aware of it. You don't have to be it.
Right. So in the Noach Sicha, the Rebbe brings 3 ifanim in Shuvah, 3 ways of change. In Noach Tavshin Beis, there's going down and gribbling and dealing with all the garbage. There's just learning, not just living a higher reality, and then there's dealing with all the pratim, dealing with all the details. We're not right. It's not the from a community where some say in some places, right, the minhag is to put everything under the rug, right? No, we're aware of everything that's going on, but we won't define ourselves by that. We're looking from the outside. How do I heal that? How do I correct that? How do I make these details in sync with the collective well-being and health of ourselves and of the community?
So I want to finish the Farbreng on that. I want to make 2 final nekudas. Number 1, in case the English was too fancy, it's 2 Elitarnics overcompensate. So,
right, and I have to be mindful of the fact that I have that I'm in a moisid. That's a language that I grew up not knowing a word of.
Yeah, as they say in Elitarni, you grow up not knowing 3 languages. And the second nekuda is that we're dedicating this Farbreng and Nishmas, our father, Chassid Abiyena, but the Chassid Meir, whose Yartzeit Gimel Shvat, the 3rd Yartzeit, or Ibn Ali and Neshama, and the ultimate Aliyah / Yerida that should be Zeicha Bakitz V'dan Neshech Neyafa, V'hu B'Seicham, and it should only be Simchas Bayan Zaleh.
And I do think, you mentioned Tati, I do think that in his way, he straddled the fence. He had this.
Yeah, he did.
He was a regular American boy. And he had he was here, and he wasn't really a guy in denial of his own nefesh bahamis and other people's nefesh bahamis. At the same time, he strived for and he tried to live
because it wasn't about him. He was the Rebbe's mensch, and that's one thing that became clear. The man accomplished so much in his life because it wasn't about him. And right. If it was about him, chances are he would have accomplished much less. I think only after his passing did he become aware of what he did. The famous mimer of the Rebbe by Rabbi Zakeh that's sitting on his deathbed, not knowing if I've accomplished anything. So but the point is, we all have a nefesh bahamis, but that's not a chiddush. We all know that. We spend so much time in there, and the point of this sicha is be aware of your issues. Otherwise, chas v'shalom, we could have terrible situations. But transcend it. That's not you. It's an issue you have to deal with, but that's not you. We should all be able to implement it, and we should all be able to take the sicha and bring it into our lives, so that we should not only live Mashiach within Galus, we should live Mashiach, is Galus Melcha, Mashiach Teitum Yan. Okay.